Hello, everyone. This slide presentation will continue their topic of the integument, the skin and skin adaptations of mammals. And today's lecture is about claws, nails, and hooves. But something to keep in mind here is that these are all claws. So your fingernails, horses' hooves, deer's hooves, claws of a gray squirrel, claws of a lizard. These are claws of a bird. They are all an ancestral condition called the claw. So we say claws, we think of that as being different than nails and hooves, and it is, strictly speaking. But just keep in mind they're all an adaptation of an ancestral claw. And what this basically is you have soft tissues as a mammal that are going to come into contact with surfaces. Between you, that soft tissue, and the surface, it is oftentimes good to have a hardened structure of some kind. That hardened structure is what we're talking about here. It's actually quite simple as far as mammalian structures go compared to the hair, for example. Hair is hair and hair follicle are fairly complex compared to claws. What you basically have is it's keratin. So it's basically keratin. And there are two layers, the unguis and the subunguis. And we humans don't really think much about subunguis unless you happen to trim your nails down too far. Then you feel it's really uncomfortable. Our subunguis is very sensitive. It's so sensitive, in fact, that most people cannot stand the sound of fingernails scraping on a chalkboard. That sort of stereotyped negative response comes from the sensitivity of our subunguis. The subunguis is richly provided with blood vessels and nerves. The unguis is more the functional part of the tooth, but it is dead. Dead tissue, the way that hair is dead tissue and feathers are dead tissue. So it is produced by the underlying structure. So you have a softer portion of your claw. I'm talking about as a nail is a modified claw, and you have the harder portion. The harder portion is the unguis. If you look at them from the through sections, what you see here is they're all fairly similar. It's just really a nice way to think about it. You have, for example, figure 6.1 here. You have a section through a claw, and what you see is you have the black is the hard part, and it comes down to a point. So you can imagine, and then underneath is a softer portion, the subunguis, and you can imagine almost taking a file and filing that claw to make it sharper. Well, wild mammals, of course, don't do that intentionally, but they do it unintentionally by moving the way they move around in the environment and the way their claws are shaped. They automatically sharpen their claws and wear down the claws throughout the day and throughout the year. How about a nail? We basically have claws. It's just our claws are really short. And if you just look at the section here, that's what you see here. Nails, you imagine nails are basically your primitive claw, except that it stays out of the way of the tip of the digit. We have these digit tips. Think about, I know some people have really long nails and they can type with long nails. If you have long nails, if you're somebody who likes to have long nails, then what you're basically doing is taking on the ancestral state of having claws, which makes it hard to manipulate things. Okay, the soft touch is kind of hard, if you have a long claw, right? There are good things about claws. They can be used in defense, but they are, but you know about primates, you can think of it as a claw that's just basically grows, it can grow long, but it grows in a way that stays out of the way of the pad underneath, or most of the pad underneath. And I think we all know what we mean when you look at something and say that's a nail. And then finally, a hoof. The hoof is the most specialized of all the claws, and it is you can think of it as the hard part of the claw that wraps all the way around the digit, the soft part of the digit. The subunguis is underneath, and a horse we call that, well, I'll get to the structure later of that. but it wraps around so that it forms a kind of a rounded shape that comes into contact with the ground, the edge of which is very hard, and the center of which is not as hard. So this is providing a hard structure contact with the ground that can be worn, and it's going to grow over time and be replaced and also be worn down. So let's take a look at examples of each of these here. Something to point out is that these structures, the unguists and subunguists, grow at different rates. So obviously, it's kind of hard to tell with our nails, but the claw of your dog, for example, the hard claw, when you go to trim your dog's nails, which is not a very pleasant task, and you know if you trim too close, there's blood, because the growing portion of that, the claw is extended further out than you thought. It's very hard to do, to clip it where it's just the dead tissue. But you notice that it's the hard part grows faster than the soft part, obviously. But the rate at which they grow partly determines the shape of the claw. Okay, let's take a these. They are ever growing, and they have to be continually maintained. What happens if they're not continually maintained? Well, you see this picture here. Sometimes people like to try to maybe win the, be entered into the Guinness Book of World Records for longest nails. But what you see here are examples like this figure here of a dog with overgrown claws. Here is a terrible, a really bad case of a horse with overgrown hooves. So it was, left, it was abandoned, and look at the, it can barely walk. So I have a picture of it here, trying to walk. There you go. So in a natural environment with hard soils and rocks, the hooves would never wear down. Now that said, if you have a horse, you have to have the hooves trimmed, because domestic horses in their paddocks don't move around enough during the day to wear down the hoof. And also when you're riding, you want to have sort of the perfect hoof. Hooves are a really sensitive thing. Many mammals chew their hooves. Dogs will chew their nails. Nails chew their claws. But usually wear and tear is what gets them down. Take a look at claws first. First of all, if you mammals that have claws, how good are claws? How do they work? Well, take a look at this video here. We've all seen this kind of thing before, and just notice with the ease with which this fox squirrel here, goes down this palm tree. It's slipping a little bit, but if you look at it, it's got complete control over its body. It's not going to fall. It can go head first up, head first down, round, run around. It's as if it's suction to it or glued to it, except it's not. Each one of those little claws is digging in. It's got 5 on each appendage. There's 20 claws digging in at any time. Look at this video here. See a pine marten trying to catch a squirrel. And the pine marten also is well adapted to walking on a completely vertical surface. You watch the rock climbers climb, say, in Yosemite. Look at what we have to put on, your rock climbing shoes, but also all the age you have to have and how careful you have to dig use the features of the, if you had, I don't know if long claws would really help you, but we know how well claws work. So the unguis grows outward much faster than the subunguis. And here's an important thing. The sides wear faster than the tip. So the result of the sides of the claw, sure about my dog in here, the sides of the claw wearing faster than the tip means that it maintains a narrowness. So you have a claw that doesn't get wider, but gets longer. And then it is continually worn down and occasionally even broken off. But the way it wears ensures that it stays sharp. Almost like a, I don't know, like a self-sharpening knife. You look at claws and notice how narrow they are. Again, that's to do with the rate of growth is faster at the tip than on the sides. But also the way the claws are, the wear and tear makes them sharper, keeps them sharp. And if you have a domestic cat, you can give it a scratching post. They just like, in general, they like to do that, and that pleasure they get out of doing that is what drives them to basically sharpen their claws out of nature. That feeling of needing to scratch on a post, on a tree. Bears do this a lot. That is wearing those claws down and keeping them sharp. And it's extremely effective. And if you've ever had, well, you probably have held things that have, mammals that have very sharp claws. They scratch you very, very quickly. In some species, the claw is retractable, some mammal species. So here's a diagram of a section through a cat's foot there. And you can see that these are bones here. So our bones, the common ancestral trait of bones is to have 3 segments of the bones, 3 phalange segments, tip, middle, and the base. So notice you have the tip, middle, and base there, and how there's a ligament connecting them. But in the case of a cat, that claw can be retracted. Now, that's a really interesting thing. Now, why would a cat need to have, what would be the function of having retractable claws? Why not walk around on your claws the way your dog does, or a raccoon does? A raccoon walks around and it leaves claw marks. Why not? And if we were in class, I would ask you this question. And maybe you're thinking of some things right now. Why don't you think of some possible functions of having retractable claws? The function, because this is most felids have this. Did you think of the need for stealth? So a soft pad contacting the ground doesn't create as much noise as having a claws touching the ground. That's a possibility. There could be others. They are very effective. If you look at what they do, they're so effective, by the way, that people sometimes will declaw their cats to ensure that they don't catch as many birds as they would otherwise. This is what cats do to birds, wild birds. This is a caracal, a wild cat, but house cats, feral domestic cats will do this as well. Leave it up there and not just knock the bird out or hit its wing or something like that, but actually snag it with like a hook. So the cat uses its claws like a hook. This is a passerine flying by, and it hooks it. And this is why people get their cats declawed. You can see other pictures like that. But actually, a domestic cat is very similar. My parents actually did declaw their cats in Missouri, in Oklahoma, and unfortunately, that didn't stop the cat from killing birds. It still was able to reach up, but it didn't snag and hook the prey, and instead it sort of knocked the bird down, and then it ran after it and grabbed it. But it probably reduced the number of birds that it killed. When you're out looking for tracks, which you should always do when you find a muddy spot, you can see the claw doesn't always register in the track, which tells you that even this is even for mammals that don't have retractable claws. Well, that kind of tells you that there is a function. There are positives or advantages to not having the claw part of your foot actually touch the ground. Probably has to do with with speed and stealth. If you look at a cat, the tracks are very similar to a canid. There's a felid, there's a canid. What you look for in canids is you have this, they very typically leave a claw mark. Sometimes they don't, though. I've been fooled before by just a domestic dog walking, not leaving claw tracks. It's really, really bizarre. By the way, they're only leaving 4 digits because their 5th digit, their thumb, is vestigial in the form of a dew claw. And same with the cats. Immediately recognizable. If you look at the hind track of a cat or a dog, it's only 4 toes. Look at a fisher, though. Look at this. You can see there are 5 digits. It registers a thumb or a big toe. And but the claws oftentimes are not, especially in snow, they don't register. Again, another example of the need to keep claws out of the way as well as to use them. Raccoons are immediately recognizable. They have almost finger-like digits. They very often leave claw marks, especially in mud. And you can see it would be hard not to, and at the same time, you can see how they could avoid leaving claw marks. They have to leave claw, they have to contact, the claw has to contact the ground throughout this normal movements in order for the claw to continue to stay sharp and at the right size. Here's a Virginia opossum. There's no mistaking that track for anything else in North America, especially the hind. Look at the hind, looks like a primate. Look at that thumb. The front is somewhat raccoon-like. What about nails? Nails is what we're most familiar with. We spend many people spend a lot of money. We certainly spend a lot of time, and they're annoying. At the same time, some people really like to decorate nails. So what is this all about? Well, if you look at primates and the way they move around in their environment, it's kind of obvious why they need, why it's useful to have, how you can imagine how a claw would get in the way, put it that way. So here is an example of primates moving around in their environment. In this case here, they're stealing food, probably somewhere like in India. So we primates, what do? We grab things. In this case here, they grab things and they grab fruits and they steal them and run off with them. So primates have been doing this for millions of years. It's even got cheek pouches. But the need for dexterity. How about primates? You're talking about a need for dexterity. Primates, of course, are famous. Non-human primates are famous for being able to climb and for their great agility, which is very useful in this case, so they can go into people's homes and steal food. When I was in Costa Rica once, my wife and I were in Costa Rica, the people who made the lunches there and dinners said they had to watch out for white-faced capuchins, which would come along and steal food and run away and then climb back up in the trees. So dexterity, claws might interfere with dexterity. And the other thing is how important is touch. So imagine reaching out and feeling something. Imagine hunter-gatherer people's feeling of a fruit. You're reaching into a bush, shrub, and you're feeling of fruit. So the shape of things in our environment is very important to us. The feel of it. So we gain information from our environment partly by feeling it with our hands. We have very, very sensitive fingertips. So that's where nails sort of get out of the way of that. That's another hypothesis for why nails evolved. Just be really cautious, by the way, all these kind of hypotheses, they're sometimes called just so stories. You really need to do experiments to actually test that, and you really can't go back in time and truly test this. These are all hypotheses. This is what we're familiar with. It's not like, I always wonder about this explanation because you see, for example, you see, gray squirrels move around in trees. What the gray squirrels don't do, though, when they move around trees, imagine a gray squirrel and a squirrel monkey. They move similarly through the trees. They actually look similar. Squirrel monkey is well named. But what, of course, squirrel monkeys can do is grab and hold, not just having opposable thumb, they can just wrap their hand and their feet around things, which the gray squirrel cannot do. So if you also need to be able to wrap your hand around things, then claws get in your way. If you, we know that it sure looks like anyway that the dexterity using with your hands is extremely important. God, of course we know that, being human being the way it is. If you look at the shape of the hand, forelimb of across the primates, they're fairly similar in a lot of ways, but there are slight differences. Each species is slightly different. But if you look at those diagrams, that looks like a mammal for which dexterity is very important. Being able to handle things. You imagine humanity without hands being dexterous. We are not the only species that has nails. Some non-primates do. What are some examples of some non-primates? This very strange and interesting mammal called a hyrax. There are several species of them in the Middle East and Africa. They are walking there. It's in one of the zoos. They have nails, and they look like nails. And when its feet are touching that rock there, the claws are not, it doesn't have claws at all. It has nails like ours. It's like the hard part of the claw is getting out of the way of the rest of the digit. Manatees.
Abrasion to the flipper when the
manatees, like elephants, have nails. Now, they're probably not homologous to primate nails. What you see here is you have the hard part, the unguis, which extends out but does not wrap around and does not extend out, and it's not sharp. Now, what do they use them for? Well, they have some videos here. If you've ever swam with manatees, basically what they do is they sort of walk along the bottom when they need to get, they also swim fairly well. You get a chance to go to Florida, the Crystal River, and go down and swim with them, you should. I don't really know, honestly, what the, you can speculate on why nails evolved for them. In the case of a elephant, we're going to look at a little closer at elephant, because elephants we call a hoof, even though it's actually the hard part of the claw is actually a nail. We'll look at them separately. But hyraxes, there you go. There you see it. Almost human-like nails. Manatee, human-like nails. Elephants, human-like nails. So that, I'm going to stop this video and start a new one on the final type of claw, which is the hoof. Actually, there's one more. I guess we need to a couple of more we need to look at. So let's continue here. There was a few more. A couple of oddballs here, a couple of odd things before we move on to the hoof, because the hoof is the most highly specialized and highly derived claw. Camels. So camels have a, we call it a hoof because we think of them as ungulates, which they are. The limb structure is an ungulate. The way they walk is an ungulate. They are an ungulate. However, instead of a hoof, they have nails. So it's not actually a hoof. For this to be a hoof, you'd have the hard part, the unguis, wrap all the way around each digit, forming a solid structure that's mostly wrapped around with unguis. But that's not the case. Instead, what you have is mostly a fleshy pad with the unguis near the tip and covering the top. So that qualifies as a nail. Doesn't qualify as a claw, doesn't qualify as a hoof, must be a nail. And then finally, there's a highly derived thing, the monotremes, keep in mind, they split off, Prototherians split off from the rest of us, the line that led to the rest of us back in the Mesozoic period, kind of late mid-Mesozoic. And when they did, obviously they're going to have their own independent evolution of many derived features. And one of them is, in some cases, a spur. So they have a spur. It is a, I don't really know that it's homologous, what it's homologous to in Therian mammals, but it is a venom. It actually has a gland associated with it in a duct, and it actually transmits venom. So a venomous structure is something that is independently evolved throughout the vertebrates. Of course, we think of venomous snakes, but there's venomous, you name it. You probably think of 2 or 3 other venomous things that have venomous, a venomous spur. But the monotremes, platypus, for example, has that. The echidna also has a spur. However, it is vestigial. So the common ancestor of the echidna and the platypus, it had a spur, presumably had venom function, but in the lines leading to the echidna, that was lost. Kind of like the way we're losing our back molar, we call our wisdom teeth. Okay, the next video will be on the hoof.